Welcome back to the channel. We've been super busy lately. We've been out rock crawling a ton, and I've taken a bit of a break from my rock crawler build. For those who haven't been following along, I've been building a rock crawler from scratch and basically vlogging the entire thing along the way. And I've had a bit of a break there because we were out rock crawling every weekend, out since mid-May or so, but now I'm getting back to it. Good news is my axle shafts just came in, so I wanted to start getting these put together so I can finish my front Dana 60 axle. Now for axle shafts, I'm just running 35 spline forged chromoly axle shafts. And on my last buggy, those have always been plenty strong. The only issue I run into is my ring and pinion. That seems to be the fuse on that front Dana 60. So even if I was running 300M axle shafts, I would probably still just be breaking that ring and pinion before I had an axle shaft issue. Now one way to make your axle shafts a little bit happier is to run good U-joints. And why I say that, this is a 300M Brannick U-joint. This is about a $300 U-joint, I think, off the top of my head, versus a $50 Spicer U-joint. Now I think Spicer are great U-joints on the drivelines. That's what I run on the drivelines. But for axle shafts, I would run these good. I would pay the extra money to run the good U-joints. A few reasons why. When you run one of these $50 U-joints, they're going to break a little easier. The caps are filled with needle bearings. They have all these little needle bearings inside there, and the needle bearings fail, and then all of a sudden the cap cracks, and then when that happens, it rips the ear off, possibly both axle shafts. So not only do you take out a U-joint, but you could take out your inner and outer axle shafts, which those take a bit longer to get than just a U-joint. If you pay the extra money and run the good U-joint, they don't typically have catastrophic failures. They typically start squeaking really bad and just sound horrible until you do something about it. But what I've done is I make sure to grease these every time before I go. They got to stay full of grease. They're just basically a cap that's sliding on the ear. So it's basically a bushing and no needle bearings, and that makes them a lot stronger because also look at the size of this. Is the Spicer, this is the good Brannick U-joint, and just the ear size on the U-joint alone is way bigger. So you have a stronger ear, and the cap is, I mean, they're the same size. They're a 1480 U-joint, but anyway, these are a lot stronger and a lot less likely to break. So if you break an axle shaft, usually you just have a clean break on the axle shaft on the inner or outer, and the U-joint's just fine because the U-joint's stronger than the axle shafts. That's the reason why I spend extra money on the good U-joint. More than likely you're not going to have a U-joint failure. It's more than likely going to be the inner or outer shaft. I've seen a lot of these U-joints take a lot of abuse on different rear steer buggies and things like that. And I'm not saying they can't break, but what seems to happen is like they need lots of grease, and the cap can start to maybe work its way out if the ears on the axle shaft start to get wallowed out. What I'm going to do is start to get these axle shafts all put together. I got the outer stub shaft here, and I've got these machined for 50-degree steering because I want this front and rear axle to steer very sharp. That's how I've been building them. So they're all machined so they can turn super sharp. We're going to start putting these together. So I began putting my axle shafts together, and one thing you got to remember is to put the snap rings on the inside of the U-joint before putting them into the axle shaft ears. If you don't do that and you start putting the caps on, you got to take it all back apart again and put those snap rings in there. Sometimes I use my bearing press to put the caps on, and sometimes I just use a hammer. Using a hammer is a little bit easier to judge if things are going crooked. If you're using a bearing press and the cap starts going on crooked, it's easy to use too much force and to start tearing up either the U-joint or the axle shaft ears. Lightly tapping it with a hammer will get it done, and it seems to be easier to make sure everything's staying straight. So here's the axle shaft all put together. Got the caps in place, we've got the snap rings. The snap rings go right there on the inside, and you want to use the full snap rings like this because they're the strongest and not the C-clips. These axle shafts are also machined out right here. You can see that for 50-degree steering. That way they don't bind up and break when you try to steer that far. They also come with these grease zerks that go in the caps right here. I put those in after I slide the axle shafts into the axle housing. So I began putting the axle shafts in, making sure everything stays straight as to not damage that seal on the inside. The seal has a little guide that once you lift the axle shaft up just enough, it'll slide right into. Then as it starts to go in, you have to line the splines up inside the carrier with the axle shaft splines. I then began putting the unit bearing onto the axle knuckle and tightening it down. After that, I began putting the outer flanges and the snap rings in place as well. The outer flange basically connects the unit bearing to the axle shaft and allows the axle shaft to turn the unit bearing. For my front and rear axles, this is the same process as I'm using the same Super Duty outers for the front and rear axles. Ems, do you think you're going to be able to fit in this buggy better than the new buggy or our current buggy?
Yeah.
How about Atlas? Addie?
Yeah.
I think so too. You fit in there way better than the other one. Look at.
Wait, which one is the brake so much against the gas?
The brake is on the left side, the gas is the little one. But look at that, you fit in there, Ems. I think you're going to be able to...
Reach the gas.
Oh, that's... Yeah, you can. The seat's going to move a little bit forward. You don't have to push it too hard, huh?
Yeah, and you only have to push it barely.
Yep. You ready? We need to get this thing done, Ems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
It's almost done.
Hey, what's that dog doing? So, I got my axle shafts in. These are my 300M Brannick stub shafts that for my rear steer axle here. I can get these in and get this finished up, and what I'm going to do is the same process that I did for the front axle shafts. I'm going to put my U-joints in and then slide these in, put the unit bearings and everything in there. Then this chassis will pretty much be a full roller. So, what's so special about 300M? Well, it's the strongest you can get. My front axle shafts are forged chromoly. And then I understand the next level up after that is billet. And then 300M is the level after that. And every level you go up, it's supposed to get a percentage stronger. Now, I'm not sure what that percentage is, but these stub shafts cost about 3 times as much as the front stub shafts did. So I'm not sure they're 3 times stronger, but they're quite a bit stronger. And with rear steer, you need to get the strongest axle shafts that you can. The best thing probably would have been to go 40 spline, but I've seen a whole lot of people get by on 35 spline just fine. So that's what I'm doing, and most people I know are running 300M in the rear just because you have that all the weight of the vehicle on these axle shafts when you're climbing up something. So you want to give yourself the best chance to not break anything. So another question people had when measuring for these axle shafts on the seal surface and such, what I did was stick the tape measure in there, and then I run it all the way to the end of the splines. I then got the measurement at the end of the splines, and then I got the measurement where the end of the seal is going to go. So I have the seal in there right now. The seal goes right inside of the spanner adjustment for the carrier backlash and such. So basically then I just measured to the end of the surface of the seal and added just a little bit more so that I know that the seal would be on the smooth surface right there. So that's how I went about this process. Another question I get about building a 14-bolt rear steer is what seal did I use inside here? Well, the seal kit I ordered just basically replaces the adjustment for the backlash on these 14-bolt axles, and it comes with a machine surface inside here that a Dana 60 seal basically sits inside. So the seal isn't a big deal to get. What you're buying with the kit is this machine surface that the seal sits inside. So you pull this one right here out, replace it with this with the seal in it, put it back in, set your backlash and preload, all that good stuff. And then once it's in there, then I measured for my seal surface on the axle shaft. So that's how I knew how far to tell them when I ordered these axle shafts where to end the splines. And I just went with the standard size for splines, and then I measured a stock 14 bolt shaft to where the splines ended. Then I just got my measurement to the end of the axle seal and added just a little bit of room so it wasn't going to be too short. And that's how I measured for the seal on this axle. So I started with the seal, putting that in there, and then got my measurements and ordered the axle shafts. These axle shafts do take 6 to 8 weeks to order, so you want to get that done as soon as you can. But they have these 14 bolt seals in stock. I ordered mine from Crane. Anyway, that's how I went about sealing that up. Because a stock 14 bolt that goes out to the end, the oil flows through that tube, and you have to now seal it off right there. You have to now seal it off right here, which they didn't used to be sealed right there. So that's how I did that. Another thing I forgot to mention is these 300M axle shafts. They both splines go into these bells. It's not all one piece, they're two piece. So basically, when you break an axle shaft, you can just replace the spline shaft and not the end, or vice versa. That's kind of a nice thing. The forged front axle shafts I have are all one piece for both the inner and outer. But the higher end ones, the more expensive ones, are two piece. So you can just replace this or just replace this and keep these. So that's kind of the nice thing about these. This is the end product of my 14 bolt rear steer axle. So there it is. All I got to do is RTV the cover and put it all back together, and just torque everything. A lot of the bolts are just hand tight right now. So the axle shafts are all in there, the brakes are in there. I've started running the brake lines. I've started working on the plumbing up there to run up to the rear steer valve and everything else. So all of that's in the works. So that's where this thing's at. It's just about wrapping it up. All Brannick axle shafts and U-joints. So I'm excited. So here's the front Dana 60 axle. I got a rim on there just to kind of want to see what it looked like. But there's the front Dana 60, a little bit of dust on there. I've started running the hoses. I'll do a separate video on that. And that's getting all finished up too. I'll just have to go and do a final torque on everything and put the front cover on there and torque it all down. So making little bits of progress as we go. The unit bearings and brakes I ordered from Brannick as well. They're all drilled out to 8 on 6.5 because I didn't want to deal with the Ford bolt pattern. Biggest reason is so I can switch tires and rims with my other rock crawler, and it just makes a lot more people use 8 on 6.5 than the Ford pattern. And here's the Dana 60 from the other side. Got the brakes on there. Starting to plumb up the hydraulic ram and everything else. And just chipping away. Just a quick overview. A whole lot of stuff. All just still taken apart. My next videos, I'm going to be working on the plumbing and electrical wiring, which I've been chipping away at. So that's where I'm at. And this is how it looks as of today.